Okay, so we are live. It looks like so anyway. Anyway, hi, Steph. It's
Hello.
Stephanie here today. So if you're watching today, we're going to be talking about emotional eating and cravings, and all that good stuff, which is one of my favorite topics in the world to talk about. Sometimes people don't realize that they are truly connected. So I'm so excited to have Steph here to talk about that. So Stephanie, I would love for you to introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about you.
Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Stephanie, and I am a registered dietitian. I'm a personal trainer, and I'm also a mindset transformation coach. And so I help women to kind of beat the self sabotage and lose the weight for good. So my goal always with clients is like, I want this to be the last program that you ever need because we get that mindset transformation. So I work with clients that have issues with emotional eating and who really just need to connect with themselves more in order to be the person to create that
Mm.
result. And so I have been a dietitian since 2007. And I've been working as a coach probably for like 2 years. I worked mostly clinical, and I am now I feel like I'm in my zone of genius. Like I love what I do and it's fun. And so, yeah, that's just a little bit about me.
Awesome, awesome. I love that, Steph. And so you said you did a little bit of clinical, which is really good. So how did you come into, being a dietitian and become to get into this space? Like, what motivated you to do that?
Okay, so I've always been an athlete. I played basketball in college. I started when I was in fifth grade. And so I've always loved sports and being active. So I remember I was talking to a career counselor in college because NCAA rules, I can't, on scholarship, I could not go into my junior year undeclared as a junior. And so I was like, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I actually thought I wanted to do psychology, which is very
Mm.
interesting how it kind of came right back around to that. But I thought that being a kines major was too cliche. Like all the athletes were kines majors, and I didn't want to do that. So then I was like, okay, well, I like science, I like nutrition. So I got into clinical. So I worked in acute care hospitals. I worked in home health, intermediate care, long term care, and I loved it. Right, I did, but I felt like I wasn't growing. And so what happened to me was I started feeling this like urge, like there's something more.
Mm.
And I started feeling like I want to wake up in the morning and I want to feel like on fire. I want to be like so excited that I get to do what I love. And so at the current job that I had, I really was like coasting. I was fine, but I really wanted to like really love what I do. So I never thought that I like had what it took to be an entrepreneur. I never did. I always thought that I was not articulate, that I didn't want to manage other people. Like I had all these negative, like self-limiting beliefs. And by following my intuition, I was able to reach out to a few people on Instagram, I think, on Instagram. It was two different women who kind of introduced me to coaching. And I was like, how are you making money doing this? Like, how are you doing this? And so I kind of got introduced to it because my intuition was like, you need to reach out to this person. You need to reach out to this person. And it never fails. Whenever I follow my intuition, always leads me to a good space. And so from there, I started coaching in someone else's program, and now I have my own coaching practice. So yeah, it's kind of like a full circle moment. Like I'm proud of myself, like to be able to like, okay, I went from this. Like I never thought I was an entrepreneur. I used to tell my boyfriend like he used to always, because he has his own business, and he was like, "Yeah, you need to do this and that." And I was like, "Will you please leave me alone? I just want to go to work and come home and be left alone." That's what I thought. But I have definitely changed so much in the last like 5 years. I'm a totally different person.
Wow. I love that. That is so beautiful, and I can definitely relate to like wanting, not knowing if you have what it takes to be an entrepreneur, and love for psychology. Like the moment you said that, I was like, oh, I used to think I wanted to be a therapist, like
Yep.
so all that. So that's really really exciting, and I love your story for how you got into this. And so, you guys, if you are happening to catch the replay, please press hashtag replay. If you're here live, drop live. And we're here to answer all of your questions about emotional eating. So, Stephanie, I love the topic of emotional eating. So, tell me how you came to be some sort of an expert on that topic. What led you to talk more about emotional eating?
You know, like I mentioned before, I really like science. And so I used to approach helping people through science. I used to like give all of the like scientific reasons why you need to do X, Y, and Z. If heat up spaghetti sauce, it increases the lycopene in the sauce. You know what I'm saying? Like I thought I was like approaching it like if you know better, you do better type of thing. And then that's when I was like into clinical. So I was like, looking at labs and doing tube feeding calculations, very analytical. And that's my brain anyway. So then when I actually got into coaching, it's like, okay, people don't care that lycopene increases when they heat up their spaghetti sauce. They want to know how, like, what happens, like, on a daily basis, like, what they need to do on a daily basis. And they want their problem solved, right? And so just working with more clients and having that desire initially to, like, want to help women with their weight loss
I'm
and their
here,
mind.
Steph. So it kind of went in here.
Oh, okay. I can hear you. You're a little bit frozen, but it's okay. You're back.
I'm here. I can hear you, but keep going.
Okay. Okay. So I wanted to help women, but I was approaching it from a very analytical state. So as I started working with more clients, it's like, oh, okay, that's not what really matters. They actually want to know more about their habits. And like that is how I can get them to cook more at home so that their lycopene can be increased, right? Because I just, it was just like I was so analytical. But it was like habits, like what you do on a regular basis, is what's going to get you to your goal. So you don't have to understand all of the inner workings because there's always more tips. There's always more nutrition information. People get PhDs and still don't know everything there is to know. Like most people are able to reach their goals with the knowledge that they have right now, but it's the behavioral health part that they're kind of missing. They're missing systems. They're missing like a reset every week to like, after they come back from vacation or they're on the weekend and then they let that slide into weeks and weeks of being mindless. And so just working with more women and finding patterns that multiple women were struggling with. I'm like, oh, okay. So you're saying the same things that this person said. Now I see a pattern of a kind of like a way of thinking that's not giving you the result that you really want. And so that kind of, I had a huge mindset shift in terms of what clients need and what they need help with. So I think that just came with listening to the clients that I was coaching, and then my analytical brain going to work trying to figure out, okay, what's going to be the right solution. Plus, I research and all the things. And so I think that's kind of how I got a lot more familiar with it.
Yeah. And one of the things that I want to circle back to that you mentioned was you are seeing common patterns with women who emotionally eat. So can you talk a little bit about what those common patterns were?
Yeah. Okay. So in regards to emotional eating and patterns, I would say the pattern of feeling guilty like afterwards. So typically there's some sort of trigger that happens, and sometimes that's predictable and sometimes it's not. But there's a habit that has happened so many times in their brain that this trigger happens and then they go to food. And then they feel guilty about it. And then some people tend to then restrict, right? So maybe they ate too much of this one thing, then they go into this restrictive cycle, and it's just a roller coaster ride because you never stop enough to be mindful and like reconnect with yourself. And so that's definitely one thing, just guilt. Another thing I would say is feeling like they need like a thing. And this is common with a lot of dieters. Like they need a diet, right? So they think that a diet is going to just like cure my emotional eating. Like just tell me what to do, just tell me what to eat, and let me lose this weight, and then everything's going to be fine. When really it's, I say this a lot, but it's true that like reconnecting with yourself and understanding how to give yourself self compassion, how to trust yourself and have that treat meal, and then be able to go and get back on your meal prep. Right. So I think all of it really comes down to like um, core relationships with yourself. So, for example, someone will come to you and be like, "Oh, I want to lose X amount of pounds," and you'd be like, "Why?" And they say, "Oh, I want to, frolic on the beach." Right. And I'm like, well,
Right.
why? Why do you want to frolic in the beach? And so as soon as you continue to be curious with your brain and dig and ask why, it's like, okay, the core reasons usually come down to a few things: self-worth, self-love, self-confidence, self-trust. Like once you get down to that why, now then you kind of know like, okay, this is the real reason um, why you have whatever goals that you have. But I think that increasing your level of awareness. So some clients really are not aware how much or to what extent they're actually like emotional eating. And so bringing that to their awareness might be one thing. But then also, some people are very aware, like, yes, this is what I do, but they don't know how to stop it. They don't know how to like end the pattern. And so teaching them like replacement behaviors or like how to sit with their feelings, and then maybe why, because sometimes there's some deep stuff. I've had clients who have had like sexual trauma in their past, and they would overeat in order to like protect themselves essentially. After they started seeing results, it's like, okay, that's their trigger. I'm down to a certain amount of weight, and now that's my trigger, and I start eating more to protect myself because I wasn't safe as a child. So
Mm.
doing a lot of inner child work, oh, it can get deep.
Woo, girl, inner child work. Woo,
Yes.
Lord. I'm doing that in one area of my life right now, and I want to run away from it. I'm like, I
Yeah.
do this.
Mhm. And see, some people run away and they go to food. Like that's their comfort. Like that's their friend. And
Yeah.
so yeah.
And you mentioned guilt, and this is something that I talked about on Monday on one of my posts. Like you mentioned, like the first sign or one of the more common things that you see is guilt. So one thing that I also see, like kind of like you mentioned too, with my clients is they'll eat, then they'll feel guilty. So what does so we understand that there are triggers, and there's something I want to come back to because there's so much juiciness that you just said. So I'm like, I'm trying to pick a starting place. So somebody eats, they feel guilty, right? What now?
Mhm.
What do you what would you tell that person is their first step to getting out of that guilt?
Okay. So first I would say like you overate, or maybe you ate something you feel like you shouldn't have. What are you making that mean about you?
Mm.
Because people eat cake, people eat ice cream. Like it's typically not a big deal, but you're making it mean something about you, and we got to figure out what that is. Like, what are you making that mean? Does that mean that you're not worthy and you don't deserve to eat dinner tonight, or does that mean that you feel like you're a failure because you keep like having this same cycle? Like what does that mean for you, and what are you making that mean? And then it's like, okay, I'm making it mean this certain thing. Well, why? Like where did you get that from? where's the source of that? Like who taught you, or how were you informed that that's what that means, and like connecting those two. And so I kind of help them to kind of like realize their own I want to say thinking errors, but there's sometimes where things are just not in alignment and not congruent. And so if we start to recognize like, oh, just because I ate this, that has nothing to do with me as being a failure. Like those two things don't have to be connected. And so I feel like everything is self-awareness. Like if you, for example, you're trying to, be on a budget, and you just take that debit card, you just swipe and swipe and swipe and swipe and swipe. And then somebody might ask you, like, hey, how's your spending habits? And you might be like, oh, it's not that bad, right? But then when you like, if you have an app or if you're using cash, and every time you pay for something, you see that money go down and down and down. And it's like, oh, you're going to pause. You're going to be like, hold on, you're going to make some different changes and some different choices. So I think like the pure awareness and you getting curious about your brain allows you the opportunity to make new choices. So that's like the first thing. And then we can ask, like, okay, well, why? Well, does it make sense that, you're equating eating this cheesecake to being a failure? And then what are the actual facts? Like, what are the actual facts? And listing those out for your brain, because your brain likes evidence. And so we need to find that evidence for your brain to say, like, what you're connecting emotionally isn't a fact. It's just like a thought that you're going with. And so I teach my clients what's called a self-coaching model. It's a life coaching tool for intentional thought creation. And so noticing the thoughts that naturally come up, but you are not those thoughts, and that you get to pick the thoughts that linger in your brain. So
Yeah. Oh my goodness. That's so like I love the fact of you. First of all, I love the fact that you teach them to get curious about their thoughts, because I feel like the breakdown often happens and we miss this opportunity when we have a judgment of our thoughts, right? So if we're judging our thoughts instead of getting curious about it, that's kind of where the breakdown. I feel like that's where the learning experience kind of stops. It's like
right.
I'm just judging. And you mentioned something about like being aware. And I think thinking back to my own experience with emotional eating, I literally didn't become aware that I was an emotional eater until after I lost weight. Like I was like, oh, I didn't even know that was a thing. So,
Right.
and then I often say to people like, oh, when it comes to emotional eating, they feel like they don't emotionally eat. So, what are some, I guess, some signs or some evidence that you might personally be, an emotional eater?
Okay. So if you are the person that, number one, if you feel like food is your friend, if every time there's an emotion, like certain emotion, you run to food, if you eat past the point of like being satisfied and you're constantly eating, like even when you're not hungry, or like you've already eaten and you're full, but you keep on eating, that is one sign that you might be an emotional eater. Um, you might give in to like peer pressure, because a lot of people, they assume that emotional eating is like, oh, well, I'm sad and I'm going to eat this ice cream. But sometimes it's, I'm celebrating and I'm overdoing it on alcohol every weekend. Or maybe I'm giving in to peer pressure at, you go to your grandmother's house and she wants you to eat, 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 eat. And you feel pressure, or because you feel guilty if you say no. So then you eat more than you should, or things that you really don't really want, but you're just trying to be nice. Um, Let me think of some more examples. You might be an emotional eater if food causes you to like have like breakdowns. Like for example, I had a client who every time she would like her and her husband would get into an argument, um, she would go and like get like whatever she was getting, like binge eating, whatever. And she would then feel guilty, But then like that kind of turned into what is it called when you like I don't want to say throw it up, but what is it called when
Oh,
you
okay. Like, dang, it's like you're talking about like it,
bulimia? Like yeah.
okay.
And so like turning that into like 'cause you might be a person who's like 'cause I just talked to a person today actually who had that cycle and she would like purge, that's the word I was looking for. She would like purge herself. And so you may not think like that's emotional eating. You might think that's another severe problem, but it's like, oh no, like this was a trigger that you had, and it's just an emotion. It's just like you being unable to really help in a healthy way deal with a certain emotion. And there was one other example I was going to give, but I have forgotten. I have forgotten. So keep asking me questions, and I'll come back to it.
Okay, that was really good. Talking about how, because even you just introduced me to some new like definitions of it when it comes to like eating and purging and stuff like that. And I never would have associated like that with a form of emotional eating, but I can so see it because her feelings are triggered, and she has this habit, and that's what she's going into. So I
Mhm.
can totally see that. You mentioned something earlier, where you were talking about like building that self trust, like when it comes to like being around food, because you also talked about like going over with family members and eating food that you don't really want to eat. And to me, that seems like a form of you breaking self trust, right? So like because you're not trusting yourself around food or trusting yourself with individuals, like you're just ignoring all of you and giving into that peer pressure. So, how does somebody begin to build self trust with themselves when it comes to this?
So I think that of course you have to be aware that this is a problem and then like call it what it is, right? And then look at the facts and then set some boundaries. Because sometimes when we don't have boundaries with other people, it typically means like we don't have boundaries with ourselves. So everyone who we have relationships with is our mirror to us. It's a mirror to how we are communing with our own self. And so if you're solid on your boundaries, you're okay being solid on your boundaries with other people. But if you kind of feel like you don't trust your own self with your own feelings, like if you can't trust you with your feelings, right, then you feel like you can't show anybody else your authentic self either because you feel like they can't handle it because you can't handle it.
Mm,
So I think getting clear on boundaries, and that's something that I talk about in my program too, is like, how do you want to deal with life situations? How would you like to deal with stress in your best life? If you're operating at your highest and best self, how would you like to handle stress? Because life will be stressful and you get to decide how you want to handle it. And I think that it only matters that you actually have a value system and then execute that. Like that can make you feel proud of yourself. But it's like if you don't even know what that is, and that goes back to that curiosity, if you don't know what your values are, if you don't know what your boundaries are, when uncomfortable situations happen, you might not be as strong as you need to be because you're not solid in your own self. But to answer your question, how can you build more trust with yourself? Practice. Like, so if once you become aware of, okay, this is an issue, how do I want to handle it? Get really clear, get some clarity on how I would like to handle situations like this. And then when that situation comes up, be aware of that situation and then practice embodying that person who's operating at her highest and best self.
mm,
And then, as you continue to practice, you become more and more comfortable in that role of like having your own back and being okay. As long as you like the decisions that you're making, and you make a choice and you have your own back, then that really is all that matters. Like,
yeah.
you have to have your own back. So just practice trusting yourself, practice creating a plan for yourself and executing it. And then once you see that, then the facts start stacking up. Oh, I said I was going to do X, Y, and Z, and I did it. Right. So I can have my own back. So that's kind of where you kind of build the self trust and consistency.
Yeah. I love that. And as you were talking about it, it made me think about something that I would hear most clients say. And I really want to ask you this question because it's like the one thing that I know that causes people the most stress or the most emotions is are in their relationships and at work. Right. And so a lot of times I feel like as women, we're afraid to, we might acknowledge our boundaries, but we don't enforce our boundaries, or we might even not even know our boundaries in those spaces. So there tends to be a lot of fear, that comes up in those areas when it comes to like executing on your boundaries. So how would you tell somebody how to navigate those, especially like career women who are like, well, I take on so much and I'm afraid to say no. I hear that often. Or, my husband came home with such and such, or they might not be happy. There's a shift in the dynamic that's going to happen in those relationships at work or in relationships. So how do you teach your clients how to navigate that when it comes to like emotional, like going back to honoring themselves and trusting themselves?
So are you meaning like being okay when other people aren't okay with you setting boundaries?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Part.
Yeah.
'Cause part,
That's
like, yeah, I'm with it. I can make a plan all day, but now I got to execute on it because this is the thing that's gonna maybe stop their triggers, as much, when it comes to them honoring themselves. I know that
mhm.
happened to me. When I started showing up differently, there was a shift. So, like, how do you navigate that?
Yeah, it's a whole process. So it's not like a one and done, like, okay, I wrote my boundaries down in my journal and now I'm gonna do this one time. It's like it's an evolution because you are an evolution. Like we are always growing and changing. So it's a constant commune with yourself and relationship with yourself. And I think it's important to establish your self-worth too, because sometimes like we talked about self trust, right? But then, like, when it comes to someone else not being able to handle our boundaries, and then us still being like, no, but these are my boundaries because I've already set my value, and not only value in like your boundaries and your like hard lines, but in you, period, like in yourself, and knowing like you may have to shed some toxic beliefs, some toxic people, some toxic situations in order to emerge as your highest and best self. And so you kind of just have to expect that, or just how can you be okay with allowing other people to have their thoughts and feelings about your boundaries, and how can you still be okay about that?
Yeah,
And kind of, because it's going to happen, especially if you're really setting some hard boundaries. And if you've always been the yes person, you absolutely can start thinking about that now. Like, how are you going to be okay when other people are not with it? And the thing is, it's not ever going to be like perfect, and it may not ever get 100% comfortable. And just because it's not comfortable doesn't mean you're doing it wrong.
yeah,
It doesn't mean you're struggling. It actually just means that these are some hard conversations I've had to have with people that I love. And every time this conversation comes up, it might be uncomfortable, but it doesn't mean I'm doing anything wrong or that I'm struggling with setting my boundaries.
yeah, yeah. Those are some really, really good. I love that when you talked about other people being uncomfortable, because I always tell people it's not your job to make everybody comfortable, and you have to be understanding of that and be okay with that. If you're watching and you're in the comments and you have any questions for Coach Steph, like in regards to emotional eating, or cravings, or anything in general, pop those in so that we can answer your questions. And so I wanted to, because I know part of it was emotional eating and cravings. And I think some people don't associate them, right? So can you tell us how emotional eating um like is associated with cravings? Like what's the link between the two?
hmm So, kind of the way that I look at it is like, if you have a trigger that causes an emotion because of some thoughts that you're thinking about whatever the situation is, it could be a habit that you've turned to food, or it could literally be like a feeling of I really want this donut or whatever, right? And so like you're craving whatever food that you're craving. Now, so those two things are linked. I feel like okay, if you're emotional eating, that means that you're turning to food when you feel a certain emotion. But cravings can also be what's the word separate from like emotional eating, so it doesn't always have to be some emotion that caused you to like really want a food. So sometimes there can be like physiological cravings for things based on like how, like if you're deficient in certain vitamins and minerals, or um for example, like if you're not getting enough sleep, right, and our stress hormones are going crazy, you may really crave more sweets. So some of it can be physiological when we have like higher stress hormones that are going to make us like want to eat more. Right before we start our period, our hormones are all over the place. Same thing like when if you're pregnant, right? Like you have cravings for certain things, you just want it. And there's no trigger. It's just like, ooh, I really, really want this. And you can almost taste it in your mouth. And so sometimes it's not about the emotion, but I do think it can be linked, but it doesn't have to be. What are your thoughts about that? Like, how do you approach that?
I definitely do process of elimination when it comes to like figuring out like when somebody tells me that they're craving things, because like you, I understand that it could be coming from other areas. Like it doesn't have to be just coming from emotion based. Like my first stop is gonna be like, what's your stress levels and all that. But if we usually that's usually what when somebody asks me that, they usually have a very high stress level or they're eating from some sort of emotion. But if I understand that that's not the case, then we start looking at diet, looking at your sleep. So there are, and I know that, they don't want to hear about the sciencey side, but we do understand that we have emotion. I mean, have, hormones like ghrelin, like you said, when it comes to lack of sleep. So I do definitely do a process of elimination when it comes to like cravings. But I often find, especially in women, because one, we hold stressful jobs, we're holding down the family, we're responsible for everybody else, we take on everybody else's needs, and that's our only way to release. I do find, usually, if I have a group of 10 women, one of them might say, oh, I'm not an emotional eater.
Yeah, yeah.
Like only one. And there's always that one person that's like, oh, I don't eat because of emotions. And everybody else like, oh, isn't she lucky? So I definitely loved your answer when it comes to that. I'm going to change direction a little bit
Okay.
because I want to know an example, because I like to give people the crux of things. So I want to know an example of you, like when you might have experienced an emotional eating like situation. Like what was that like for you specifically? And the second part of that is, how did you overcome it?
So, really good question. So, I would have probably been that person maybe a year ago, or maybe more than a year ago. But I would have probably been that person, be like, oh, I don't emotionally eat. I would have been her. Okay. So I think that coaching obviously helped. So like noticing other people's like situation. And then my boyfriend actually was like, do you realize that like every time like I go get pissed off that I like I would go to this coffee shop, and I don't even drink coffee. Like I don't like coffee. But it was called Summer Moon, and it had like the best latte ever. It had what they call moon milk. They won't even tell you what's in it. Okay. It is so good. It's so almondy. It's like, oh my God. And probably a little bit of coffee in there somewhere. I don't know. And every time that I would get upset, like I would go and I would go get me one of those lattes, and it would just like it would like calm me down a little bit. And I was like, oh, okay, so this is what emotional eating is. Like I go out for a drive and I go get this latte. And so it became a habit. And then once I realized it, I had to make a decision. I was like, do I want to change this? Right? Because you get to decide whether or not this is a problem, right? And so it's like, okay, how many times am I going to do this? And I mean, I'm sure it has a lot of calories. And so I think for me, managing stress levels, because honestly, since I haven't been as stressed, I haven't been like feeling like I need to go over to Summer Moon and get a latte. Um, and so I feel like it wasn't the thing, right? So with emotional eating, the food might make you feel better for a little bit, but it was never about the food. It was never about the hunger. And so your problem is still going to be there after you get done eating the thing. But for me, I got out of a very stressful situation, and I now feel just so much better on a day to day basis because 2020 was crazy.
Mm,
And now I don't feel like I never even think about it. Like it doesn't even cross my mind. Like when I'm in an emotional rut, it doesn't cross my mind. But I think just at the time, that was one of the things that I could control. I think that it
mm,
was like, I can go and get this. But I guess now that I have control of more things in my life, now I can control those things versus going and going to get me this latte. Does
yeah,
that make sense?
yeah.
Yeah. So that's what it was for me.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So I definitely understand that. And I think that's really interesting, like how like when you were like, oh, I wouldn't associate myself with emotional eating, but sometimes people, like you said, I think you said in the beginning, like sometimes the people that we're around are like reflectors, and the things that we have are reflectors, you know. So it's like your boyfriend like really reflected that to you, like, hey, have you ever noticed? I think that's really cool. That you had him to be able to kind of, you know, reflect your own behavior back to you. And I think that's why it's important
It
to
was
choose.
all right. He did
Yeah,
all right.
he did good. We're gonna give boyfriend some credit. We're gonna
Yeah.
give him some credit. He might have been on to something. One question that I did want to ask is I'm not gonna read the whole thing, but I'll read it like a snippet of a question that I got the other day in regards to like, well, it was a question. Someone said something to me, and it was a question that I knew that I wanted to bring to this conversation. So this person was saying how they feel, I guess, like almost like an addiction to food. So it's not, and it's not always bad food is the thing. Like it's not always that. Sometimes it's just good food too. So my first question is, how do you distinguish the difference between maybe, you know, someone who's an emotional eater versus somebody who might possibly have a food addiction, you know, in that case?
Mm. If you're feeling totally out of control and that you are powerless to the craving or the urge to eat whatever it is, or if you're like eating to the point where like you're throwing up, like it's like really, really overkill, you will know when it's like clinically really unhealthy. Like the people that typically have food addictions or even anorexia, bulimia. I used to work at a eating disorders clinic like in college a long time ago. And these were some of the most nutritionally educated people. Like they could tell you all of the nutrition facts on everything because that was their thing. And so I feel like if you're just coming to the awareness of like, oh, this might be a problem, um, kind of a lot of people have struggled with it for a long time, right? So if you're an adult, typically you've struggled with either body image or weight fluctuations or something for quite a while to the point where now you understand, like, oh, okay, I may have a food addiction. There is something called Prader-Willi as well, where your physiological mechanisms for telling yourself when you are full are non-existent. And so you're always hungry. So I used to work at another place. It was for people with developmental disabilities. And there was a lady there. She had Prader-Willi. They had to lock the refrigerator and lock the pantry because it was like she would get very, very aggressive over like needing to eat, even when she wasn't, she may have felt hungry, but felt like that all the time.
Mhm.
So, I would say if you are clinically like addicted to food, you are having severe unhealthy relationship with food, you're overeating, you feel out of control, and you're going to know when um, you will basically you know when you need help. So if you're an emotional eater, you're recognizing like, hey, I'm feeling this way, and I go and I turn to food, and maybe you don't know how to cut that off, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that you are addicted to food. But addicted to food is like you're on 10. You're like way past just emotionally eating. You like way overdo it.
Yeah. And I find that what was interesting, I think what made me want to bring this also to the conversation, because what was interesting is she also had periods of time where and I run into this a lot, where women will shut off all, um, I guess, everything that comes to food. Like they won't eat. So I know that this is swinging the other way, right? Like this is like completely just because right now we're talking about emotional eating as it comes to turning to food. Have you been able to see, or how do you see like it the other way around when it comes to also shutting off food? Do you feel like there's a link to that as well?
I feel like different people respond to like stress or emotions in different ways. So some people will be like, I'm not hungry and won't eat um, because they feel stressed. And then some people also are like, well, I'm not worthy to eat. Like, I don't deserve to eat because of whatever is going on. Maybe they made a mistake or something and they don't deserve to eat. And then, there's also on the other spectrum the food addiction and just emotionally eating in that spiral. And so it definitely depends. And it can be in the same person, like you said, that pendulum that's swinging back and forth. And a lot of times it is that. A lot of times it is because the person feels really bad for binge eating. And then they're like, okay, let me restrict and let me not eat. And so I think obviously both spectrums are problematic. And sometimes, if it's really severe, like there are dietitians that specialize in like eating disorders, even disordered eating that may not necessarily be like bulimia or anorexia, but it's called like eating disorders otherwise specified. And that just means like disordered eating. And so, seeking help that has specific training in regards to that. The eating disorders clinic that I worked at, it was so not about the food.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was so not about the food. So like if you were having a clinical issue, like not only do you need like a dietitian, but you also need like therapy that is really helping you get to the root of the cause, because it was always something else. It was, some kind of drug addiction with their parents or like a breakdown in the family. It was something. It was always something way bigger than just that individual.
And I think I'm so happy that you mentioned that, because I think that as I started getting into coaching and I would talk to more women, I saw that they would have an emotional eating thing. But then let's say we worked on that, it would become something else. That's why we're saying, like, that's why I can see you saying it's not about the food, because then it's just gonna go from food to you mindlessly like being on social all day, or it's gonna come to some sort of other, alcohol or some other form is going to take over, and you're not going to maybe even recognize that it wasn't even about the food in the first place. It's about, something, much deeper, whatever you're trying to fill, or, gap you're trying to fill. So as we wrap up here, I would love to maybe talk about some, because once you become aware, and once you understand like your thoughts and things about that, now you kind of need to transition over into healthier coping strategies. So what are some healthier coping strategies that you might give to your clients when it comes to like emotional eating?
So, number one of the first things that I teach them is the self coaching model, which is going to help them be aware of what's automatically like um, coming up as far as the sentences in their brain, their actual thoughts, and then being able to intentionally create thoughts that would yield them the results. So first of all, it's like, okay, be aware of the thoughts. Now, understand that these negative thoughts are never going to give you a positive result. Now, let's pick some thoughts that even if you can't totally get your energy behind yet, how would, for example, if someone is saying like, I'm powerless against food, right? That thought is going to lead you to be powerless with food, right? And so you're like, okay, this is my thought, this is my default. Now, how can I get my energy behind a new thought, a new empowering thought, right? And so that takes practice of like getting curious with your brain and intentional thought creation. Then sitting with those feelings. So these are the thoughts that I'm having, these are the feelings that are coming up, right? Let me sit with that. Let me get curious. Let me ask questions. Let me journal.
Oh, I think Coach Steph, I think she might have dropped off. If you guys can, let me see, make sure I'm still inside of the group. I can see me. Let me know if I know there's some people on here, so let me know if you're still able to see us because I think she might have. Yes. Okay. So I looked inside of there and I think she might have dropped off, but we'll stay on just for a few minutes in case she comes back on. But what I would love to say is we were definitely getting into some healthier coping strategies when it comes to emotional eating. And so I wanted you to still be able to have that. And hopefully, Coach Steph will be able to pop back on and let us know what those are from her. Um, let me see. It looked like I saw something on the stream. But on my end, what tends to happen is, oh, I see her coming back on. Okay.
I'm back.
Ray say I was getting ready to go into coping strategies for you, but I was like, oh, hopefully Coach Steph come back on here and she can talk about some coping strategies. Awesome.
Yes. Okay. Well, where was I? I was talking about couple strategies. Okay. Okay. Self coaching, being aware of your thoughts, creating a new thought, and feeling your feelings, right? Like sitting with your feelings, journaling about that. Now, what I have my clients do is say, okay, I'm going to pick something that I can do that actually brings me joy. Now, first of all, a few questions that you need to ask yourself is number one, when's the last time I ate? Like, am I hungry? Has it been 3 or more hours since I ate? Because sometimes, like, if you have a craving, it might just be literally that you're hungry, you need to go and eat. Um, and so, like, then what would happen if I didn't give in to my cravings?
Mm,
Like, really think about that. Like, what's going to happen if I don't give in to my cravings?
wow.
That craving is going to pass, and you're going to still be there with your goals, right? And so sometimes I do this like reflective exercise where I have them at first like list all of the things that they want, like their best life, their how they want to feel. I get them all into the visualization of like having this thing. And so I say, okay, now write down your first goal. Let's say I want to be more mobile with my kids. I want to live longer for my kids. And then I tell them to put but and then write your bad habits. So I want to be more mobile for my kids, but I eat ice cream when I'm sad.
Mm,
And it's like there's just no comparison to if you let this craving pass, you're going to be okay, right? And so just
mm,
realizing like your goals are so much deeper and like re-anchoring to your goal, like your goals are so much deeper than these like habits that you have, right?
wow.
So then I mentioned earlier, am I hungry? Right? And then what feelings am I trying to avoid? Journaling can really be super helpful. What feelings am I trying to avoid? And or what feelings am I feeling that I feel like I need to go eat? Then how can I delete or delay this craving? So sometimes we may not be able to just say, okay, no, I'm not going to have this. But maybe I can take a walk and then I can have the thing. and start practicing making that time longer and longer. So the first time it'll be 5 minutes. You go and do this activity, whatever it is, it could be anything. And then, okay, I'm going to go have the thing. And then the next time, maybe you do 6 minutes. And then you practice building up that self discipline and that self coaching during that space and time where you're delaying that gratification and get your body used to, okay, just because I had this craving and this feeling and this thought of wanting to get this thing, that doesn't mean that I have to react to that. That doesn't mean that I have to go and do this. Like taking real ownership over your decisions, because this thing is not happening to you, right? It's not happening to you like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to stop emotional eating. It's not happening to you. You are choosing. And so sometimes that's like a little hard to understand. Like you're choosing to go and get the thing. And that's okay, right? But you got to own that. You got to own that that's your choice to go do. And then understand, see, when you own that, then you can say, I choose to go and make a different choice this time. When you
Mm.
take ownership of that, then you can take ownership of your new step.
Yeah.
And so really taking ownership, doing some self-coaching, deleting or delaying. And then when they do like give into whatever their craving is, I teach them like the mindful method, what I call the mindful method, which is basically it's 4 steps, but the most important one is you eat it slowly and you really enjoy it.
Mm.
You're eating the donut. I want you not to just scarf down the donut.
Yeah.
Like take your time, eat it. If you can, if they're willing to like drink some water beforehand, drink some water, but then like savor it. Think about it, your fork down, like really enjoy it. And so that I feel like deprivation, when you're always saying like, no, I can't, I have to be real strict and I have to do this and I can't have this, that's going to make you want it even more. And so if you're having the thing, whether you're enjoying it or not, it's still gonna give you the calories, right? So if you're going to indulge after you have delayed it, after you're practicing delaying it, be mindful and be with it.
Mm.
And so I think that's helpful too. Like in other situations, whenever you're out or eating and maybe you're actually full, but maybe you still have like food on your plate, wrapping that up, putting it away, and then like enjoy the experience, enjoy your company, enjoy relationships, like,
Yeah.
and making dinner time or going out for happy hour more than just about the food. And then my last kind of thing that I kind of walk my clients do, we do a self-care strategy where long term, so that's kind of like an acute thing. Okay, this is the thought process that you kind of walk through in the moment when you're having this feeling, right? You eat the thing, right? Then your long-term strategy, though, and I have them put this in their schedule, is how am I doing something that I really love? At least once a week, but if not, a small something daily of like doing something that makes me happy, that keeps my stress level down. And that's just like a baseline because that helps not to get you to the point where you're so stressed that you're overeating. And so, just as a general rule, what relationships am I nurturing? Um, How am I laughing? Have I laughed really, really hard this week? Like, what is going to make me laugh? I might be watching a funny movie or whatever. Like, you have to have those self care practices, not just when you're stressed, but as a baseline period and schedule those in, put them on your planner, put them on your calendar so that they're a part of your lifestyle. So it doesn't have to get to the point where it's like an emergency and you need some self care.
Yeah, and it's kind of like because and that helps in any way regulate your emotions, so you're not even because you have it a part of your daily practice, right?
Yeah.
So you're almost in a sense like um preventing it from happening in the future.
Right.
So that's a
Exactly.
preventative method as well. So I love, love, love that you teach that. And so any like last minute thoughts about like, something that you think that like would drive the point home when it comes to like emotional eating, something that people, one big thing that they can take away from this video, that they're watching when it comes to emotional eating.
I would just say get curious. The more questions you ask, because really that's what coaching is. It's like, it sounds very simple, but it's like when you start asking the right questions, something breaks open in your brain. A lot of us don't ask ourselves questions, even simple questions like, what are my hobbies? That question actually sparked a huge thing in my life. At one time, someone that I really liked asked me what my hobbies were, and I had no idea. I was like, am I that boring? What the heck do I do on the weekend? I had no idea. You know why? I didn't know myself. I didn't know myself at all. I was a college athlete. They tell you exactly what to do. I went to grad school, and then I got pregnant with my daughter. And then I had, to figure out how to be a mom and like figure out how to take care of this person. I wasn't thinking about myself. And so, when she was about 3 or 4, um, what are your hobbies? I'm like, I have no idea. I'm not an athlete anymore. Like, who am I? Who is this woman?
Who has hobbies?
So it's like literally questions, man, they're so undervalued. Like, start asking yourself, why do I do this? Why am I feeling like this? Why do I keep getting triggered? Like if someone keeps angering you, you have you're irritable. Why?
Yeah.
Right? Like, why am I getting it? Why? And so you can start asking yourself more and more questions to find more about the relationship with yourself. And so the relationship with food and why you don't have the results that you want right now has more to do with your relationship with you than the actual thing. And
Mm,
so I think that the result is great, right? You can lose weight, but you want to become the person that can create the results. Like, that's more important than what the scale says. It's more important that you are the person that can create that. And that's why not skipping the journey is so important. The journey is required. You go and you get liposuction, and if that's what you want to do, that's totally fine. You still, in order to maintain that, you still have to become the person that can maintain it. So when you skip the journey, it's kind of like, okay, all of this habits, all of the self-discipline, all of the self-awareness that you would have gained along the journey, you missed it.
yeah.
So that's where the yo-yo thing comes in. So just continue to work on your relationship with yourself. It's, to me, it's like the biggest thing.
Awesome. And I'm going to be that person. What are your hobbies?
What are my hobbies? Are you asking me for real?
I'm really asking you. What are
Okay. What are my hobbies? So right now, my hobbies ain't nothing because it's COVID, but I
your
can tell you what I like to do. So it's funny because at that time, I started doing everything. Like, I started going to karaoke because I love music. So my family is like very churchy, but then like um pastors, musicians, singers. And so I always really love music. But I can sing a little bit, but not quite like they can sing. But I used to go and like karaoke, and then I used to go rock climb because I lived in Austin. And so Austin's very like outdoorsy, even though this was an indoor place. But like, I would go rock climbing out on the lake. When I moved to Austin, I actually started being a little bit more outdoorsy because I used to hate being outside. But like, be on the lake and going kayaking. Um, what else? I would love to like go to like a jazz spot. There's not a lot here,
Yeah.
but that's something that I enjoy. Again, music, dancing. I love dance. And I've always been like that. I think it's just like the mover in me. That's why I was an athlete. I like to clean, and I like to be active. And so I used to go out and dance a lot.
Yeah.
Um, and what else do I like to do? I like to eat. I
Me
like
too.
to eat at restaurants. Like I like to go to nice restaurants and like have really, really good food. I enjoy that a lot.
Awesome. Me too. Me too. I love that too.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to wrap up, but I would love for people to learn more about you and your program. So if somebody wanted to get in touch with you and work with you, what's the best way to follow you on social media and things like that?
Sure. So you can click on my profile. You can befriend me, or you can go to my personal page, and I have a link tree, and you can either join my Facebook group. I have a YouTube channel, and I am starting a wait list for my mind body reboot. So I always do something with mindset. Like if I'm doing anything, whether it's a challenge, whether it's my actual program, I always incorporate some sort of mindset. So I have a wait list right now for my mind body reboot challenge that'll be coming up, and I'm open for one-on-one coaching. So it's a 12-week program where you and I get real comfortable and we talk about all of the things that can help you really realize your goals without all of the overwhelm. And so, yeah, if anybody has any questions about that, they can just DM me.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Thank you guys so much. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for being here and talking about emotional eating. If you're catching this live or you're watching the replay, I would love to know what your biggest takeaway from this was. And if anybody has any questions, you can drop them inside the comments as well. And make sure that you follow Coach Steph on her Facebook or on social media, Instagram and YouTube, and get really acquainted with her. So if that's it, we're going to go ahead and end the broadcast. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in today.
Bye.